Hello, my name is Lindsay Weirich, and today I'm going to show you how you can create beautiful mixed media artwork using some Derwent products. Today we're going to start off with some papers, and this can be scrapbook paper, this can be old book pages, this can be whatever you have on hand. Sometimes I even save interesting looking paper bags from my shopping because the patterns are so cool. And you're going to tear them down so that we can collage a background with them. I want to use some fairly, fairly boring papers, black and white, just basic designs that will just give me a little bit of interest and texture on my surface. For a surface, I am using a piece of mat board, which is what you would use to frame a painting, and I'm taking some white glue and I'm going to basically decoupage this surface. Make sure you take your time and brush out the glue that you squirt down, or you could even work directly from a large pot of glue if that's easier, but you don't want to have wrinkles or bubbles. So I'm putting this piece of scrapbook paper down onto the surface, and then I'm going to brush over that with another layer of glue. The reason I want to do that is because that's one of the base layers, and I'll have a lot of other layers on top of that. Now for glue, I'm using a matte Mod Podge, but any white glue will work. You just want something that's not too glossy. Then as I go in to add more layers of paper, I'm going to actually put glue on the back side of the paper. I'm going to brush it on though with my brush to make sure that I don't have any dry spots, because dry spots will cause wrinkles and air pockets, and you want to make sure that you have the smoothest surface you can to begin. And another way I get it smooth is to use a rubber brayer to push out any air bubbles, wrinkles, and to make sure everything's making really good contact with my surface. You can really have fun with this background collage. Use different sizes of paper. Don't worry if they don't match perfectly, because we're going to unify it in the next couple steps. So here I have some Derwent Inktense blocks, and I'm just using the edge of them to color in some toning on the background here. And honestly, the broken blocks work the best, so don't fret if you break your blocks. I wanted to get kind of a gradation from purple to blue to green because I thought that would be really pretty in the background. And I'm just using a large wet brush to liquefy those colors. Now don't worry that they look kind of bright here, because we are going to tone them down a little bit and also tone down some of the color in our pattern, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. It's also going to make it so the colored pencils that we want to put down later will stick better. So we're going to use this magical product called Gesso, and it doesn't really matter what brand you get. I have some white Gesso here, and I'm just using a palette knife to put some here and there on my paper, and you can either wait for your Inktense to dry, or you can go right in while it's wet. It really doesn't matter. And I'm also going to add some clear Gesso. So clear Gesso is basically a clear paint that has grit to it, and that's going to help color pencils stick later on. White Gesso is a really matte, chalky paint, and that's going to kind of tone down some of the colors and some of the pattern that we have there. I find mixing them together gives me a nice almost whitewash effect that will tone down some patterns, it will lighten the Inktense, and it will just give us a really nice unified surface to work on later. If you wish to give it more color, go right in with a wet brush, pick up pigment from the Inktense blocks, and then you can add it to your surface. Now keep in mind, you can work on whatever surface you want. It could be even cardboard. Because we're putting so many layers of collage and color and then gesso, you've created a really nice barrier and a nice surface to work on regardless of what your base layer is. Now while that's still white, we want to add some texture to it, and I am going to use some plastic wrap for this. You could also use a plastic shopping bag. It doesn't really matter. Something that's going to give it a texture. You could even put bubble wrap on it if you want. But I like plastic wrap for the almost frosty, icy texture we get. So you just want to crinkle it up and just really press it in there. And then you'll set a heavy book on top to let it dry. And that will make sure your surface dries completely flat. Now we're going to remove the film. It's all dry, and we'll see the pretty texture that we have underneath. It's kind of subtle, but it does give you a bit of a mottled appearance that is really nice to work over, because it's not going to compete with the artwork that you put on top. And you can see there's no gloss or shininess there that's going to prevent anything from sticking. Now I'm going to use the Inktense blocks as a drawing tool here. I'm using the white, and I'm going to sketch on my magnolias. It's kind of like sketching with chalk on this gritty surface. It's really going to grab our pigment. So for this layer, we basically just want to get the basic shapes of our flowers in, or whatever it is you want to design, and we're going to block in and color in the undertones. I'm going to speed up this layer here just so you can see how I lay out the flowers and how I build my composition. I'm basically sketching on with the white because if I decide that I don't want something, I can always smudge that out into the background. Remember, we use that white gesso to tone down some of the elements on our pattern papers. So blending out some of that white Inktense would do just about the same thing. So you can be very free when you're sketching on with the white. That subtly toned background is going to give you enough contrast that you'll be able to see it, but it's not going to really stand out if you decide you need to blur out a line, or if you decide you don't really like it. Now, once I've got my basic flowers laid out, now I kept larger ones at the bottom because that's kind of closer to the viewer, and also it'll weight the composition a little bit more. I'm going in with some pinks, and I'm adding in some of the kind of local color of the flowers. Now, magnolias have usually white on the inside of their petals and pinky purpley colors on the outside of the petals, so you get a really pretty effect as you can see inside the flower and see the stamen, and then you can see the white petals and then little curls of the darker petals. Or you can see the outside of the dark petals with a white inside kind of curled out over it. It's just kind of an interesting flower, and I really like it. Now, to lighten some of those pinks, I'm going in with some white, and I'm just kind of getting as much color in dry as I can, because once I've wet the area, I'm going to have to let it dry again before I can add more. So I just kind of want to block in as much as I can now. Now, blocking in with a medium like this will save me a lot of time when I get to the colored pencil layer. Colored pencil is a slow medium. You think of the side of an Inktense block, for instance. It's wide. You can cover a lot of space, versus the tip of a colored pencil. That's tiny. You can cover a little bit of space, but it has its own advantages, like it's great for detail and whatnot. So I'm using the advantage of the Inktense blocks, being able to block in a lot of color. You can remember it that way too. Use your blocks when you want to block in. And now I can use a water brush here, a Derwent water brush, to liquefy that paint. Now, I want to liquefy it because that's going to help it lock into the surface, and it's going to help me bring back the tooth of the surface underneath. So if I left that Inktense dry and then I tried to go over it with colored pencil, I could, but some of that Inktense would almost be kind of slippery and powdery under my pencil, and I don't want that. I want my colored pencil to grab on top of the Inktense surface. So in order for that to happen, I need to liquefy the Inktense, and I'm just doing that with water in a water brush. Now, I'm using a water brush as opposed to a traditional brush because I just want a little bit of water. I don't want a ton. I can squeeze a water brush, even blot it on a paper towel or a rag if I'm worried about getting too much, and then just spread out the color. I want to have just enough water to liquefy the color, but I don't want to make it too thin. I do want to get a bit of an opacity here, and the Inktense white is very opaque. So opaque basically means light doesn't pass through it. It's going to block out the pattern on the paper underneath, and it's going to give me a really nice, solid, blocked in color that I can work my colored pencils on top of. And you just want to proceed in the same fashion until you have liquefied all of your flowers. Make sure that layer is completely dry before proceeding on to the colored pencil layer. Now here you can see I'm going in with some magenta. I'm adding in some of the toning and lines, and as I'm doing that, I'm going to make sure I go with the direction of the petal and with the direction of the veining and striations I would see on the petal. Now I'm going to speed this up a bit so you can see how the whole painting takes shape, and give you a good idea of how it proceeds through the layers and how it builds body and life as you add more pencil. I want to encourage you to be bold as you're going in with your colors, because you want to make sure that you can get them as dark as you want them. This is a fairly smooth surface, so it's only going to take so many layers. Now, we use the clear gesso, and that does give us a good amount of tooth, but it's not going to be as much tooth as, say, a truly sanded pastel paper or a really rough watercolor paper. So you want to go in there with those magentas, in there with those browns, in there with those whites, and try to get those contrasts established before you start blending out. Once you start putting in like heavy applications of color, you're going to lose a tooth, and then you won't be able to add more color on top. So it's good to be bold in this instance. Plus, we have some competing elements. We're not working on a white flat piece of paper. We're working on a background that's got color and texture and pattern. So we want to make sure we have some boldness in our focal point so that it can stand out above the underlying music we've already built in our background. I like to go in with some purples as well to build up those magenta colors and really just make them pop against the background. This is the longest time-wise layer that you're going to have in this painting. The colored pencil is going to take longer, but having the underlayer with the Inktense should save you some time. So you don't have to color over every single part. You could go in and just put shading, just put highlights, and call it a day, and let that underpainting really do a lot of the work for you. Just kind of keep that in mind. Of course, you can do as much or as little as you want, but one of the big reasons for the underpainting is to save you time in this layer. Now we're going to do some more collage. We started off with a collage background, and now we're going to do some collage ephemera on top. Now you can find ephemera in a lot of different places. You could print it off from the internet if you wanted to. However, you want to make sure that it is going to be waterproof. So using a laser printer would help with that. I'm using some stickers from a vintage sticker book that I had. And you can also find old calendars, things like that, where you can just trim out the images. My stickers have a border, so I'll be trimming that off. And the thing I like about these is that it's not too sticky, so I can reposition them and figure out exactly where I want them before I go ahead and glue them down. And to glue them down, all you're going to use is some of that white glue from before, put it on the back of the butterflies, brush it out with a paintbrush so that you don't get wrinkles and clumps, and then just place them down on the canvas where you want them to be. To add a little pizzazz to your painting, you can use some Derwent metallic watercolors to brush on a little bit of iridescence to the back of the wings of the butterflies. You'll notice that a few of the colors in the Derwent metallic watercolors are sheer and some are opaque. I like to make a swatch of my colors so I can tell what's sheer and what's opaque, and the sheer colors are perfect to add to the butterflies. If you get wrinkles, press them out with your fingers while everything's still wet, and then you'll get a really nice flat bond with the paper. Sometimes it happens with larger collage elements. Now I want to find something to unify the entire painting, because I have a collage, I have drawing, I have different medias, I have collage ephemera on top. I want something that's going to bring it all together, and I'm going to use some gold spatter for this. So what I'm doing is I am choosing the really opaque gold from the Derwent metallic watercolors, as well as some of the more sheer glittery golds there, and I'm coming up with a nice big puddle of color. And then I'm just going to flick that color on over the entire surface. If you use a bigger, juicier, floppy traditional brush, you will get bigger spatters. So kind of keep that in mind as you're doing your spattering. You can also brush on some color in the background if you want to. This is purely up to you and the look you want for your painting. I decided I wanted to make my butterflies and flowers stand out from the background a little bit more, so I'm going in with a denim Chromaflow pencil. It's kind of a dark indigo blue color, and I'm adding some shading around those flowers and those butterflies. Now you could use black, but I always like to save black to the end just in case something else needs a little extra pop. I don't think I'm going to need it with this painting, and I think the denim is really going to give me that softness, that just kind of soft, subtle shadow that I want. And I'm just going around all of my elements here. If you decide you need more definition in your painting, you can always go over it with a black colored pencil or even a black paint pen. I wouldn't use a fine liner because the gesso might bother the tips there, but I'm going to leave mine as is because I think it turned out really well. And I hope this tutorial gives you the inspiration to try your very own mixed media artwork for yourself. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Until next time, happy crafting!